There is a unique kind of sorrow that words often fail to capture. It is not the sorrow of a loss that comes from nature or time. No, this sorrow wears the face of someone you once trusted. It speaks in a voice you once found comfort in, and it strikes not like lightning from the sky, but like a dagger placed quietly in your back by hands you would have gladly protected with your life. This is the betrayal that comes without warning, without guilt, without explanation. They smiled in your face, praised your goodness, and nodded to your dreams. Yet behind closed doors, they tore your name apart like it meant nothing. They saw your kindness as weakness. They mistook your silence for stupidity, and worst of all, they convinced themselves they would get away with it. But here's what they didn't see. They didn't see the quiet moments where you cried, not because of their actions, but because you questioned your own worth. They didn't see the nights you stayed awake, replaying every word, wondering what you did to deserve the cruelty. They didn't see the weight you carried, smiling in public while slowly breaking in private. They betrayed you, and they did it with ease. Not once did they stop to ask if their words would haunt you. Not once did they consider the scars they were etching into your spirit, because to them, your pain was invisible, dismissed, ignored, or worse, enjoyed. There is something profoundly evil about betrayal that arrives dressed as love. It doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your view of the world. It forces you to question what is real, who is genuine, and whether trust is even worth giving again. But my friend, let me tell you something that even time itself waits to reveal. Karma is not bound by your timeline. Justice does not always roar like thunder. It sometimes arrives like a whisper, but it never forgets. The same ones who walked away without remorse, who mocked your downfall, who watched you bleed without lifting a finger, will soon understand the language of loss in a way they never imagined. They thought they were clever. They thought they buried you beneath silence and shame. But what they actually did was sow the seeds of their own unraveling. What happens when the person they used to laugh at becomes the name they're forced to remember in their own season of sorrow? What happens when karma doesn't just visit, but stays? This speech is not for revenge. It is not a song of hatred or bitterness. This is for healing. This is for justice. This is for the soul that has carried too much, too quietly, for too long. This is to remind you that nothing done to you in darkness will go unseen by the light. This is to tell you that what they did to you will become the very thing that undoes them, not because you wished for it, but because that is how divine justice works, and it always works. So now, let us walk through the truths you were never told. Let us examine how karma slowly and surely strips away everything they once clung to, until they finally understand what you endured. They took your love for granted. Now they'll long for loyalty they'll never receive. There was a time when your heart beat a little softer around them, a time when your love was not guarded, when your kindness flowed freely, when you gave without keeping score. You trusted, not because you were naive, but because love, true love, doesn't come with suspicion. You believed in loyalty, in standing beside someone, even when it's inconvenient. You made sacrifices they never even noticed. You forgave things they never even apologized for. You showed up for them time and time again, even when they didn't deserve it. Because to you, loyalty wasn't a favor, it was a promise. But they took your loyalty as a given. They saw your consistency and mistook it for weakness. They believed you'd always be there, no matter how poorly they treated you. They thought your heart was unbreakable, your love was bottomless, and your patience had no end. What they didn't understand is that even the most loving heart has a limit. Even the softest soul grows tired. You loved them through their chaos, their lies, their neglect, and still it wasn't enough for them. You gave more than they ever earned, and they repaid you with cold silence, broken promises, and half-hearted presence. And yet, you stayed, for a while. You stayed not because you were weak, but because you remembered every moment you once smiled with them. You held on to memories while they created new wounds. They took your love and treated it like background noise. Always there, always available, always ready to serve their needs. But now the silence you've left behind has become deafening to them. Now the absence of your love, the stillness where your warmth used to live, that is what haunts them. Because they didn't lose someone who was needy. They lost someone who would have stood beside them through any storm. They didn't just betray a relationship, they threw away the rarest form of loyalty they'll ever find. And here's the truth no one told them. Loyalty is not something you stumble across. It's not something you can demand or manipulate. It is earned, kept, and protected. But they never protected your loyalty. They never saw its worth. They believed they could replace you with someone easier, more convenient, someone who didn't ask for emotional maturity or commitment. But what they found were shadows of what you used to offer. Temporary people with temporary affections. People who mirrored love but lacked its substance. And that's when it hit them. When betrayal came full circle and left them alone in the ruins they built themselves. You see, karma is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the form of longing, an ache in the chest that no one else can fill. It creeps in during their loneliest nights. It whispers to them in the silence they once forced you to endure. It gnaws at their soul as they watch others receive the kind of loyalty they so carelessly threw away. And the cruelest part, no matter how much they chase it now, they'll never find a heart like yours again. They are surrounded by faces, yet none of them know how to love the way you did. They scroll through their contacts, yet not one of them would stand in the fire for them like you once did. They cry in the dark and remember every moment they made you feel alone. But it's too late now. The bridge is burned, and the echo of your love is all they're left with. You weren't perfect, but you were real. You weren't everything, but you were enough. And now they know it. But they know it in the most painful way possible, when the one who loved them the most is no longer reachable, when they crave loyalty from others, only to find emptiness in return. And that, my friend, is karma. They used your vulnerabilities against you. Now they'll be surrounded by people who only pretend to care. You opened your soul to them, not because you were weak, but because you believed vulnerability was the pathway to deep connection. You trusted them with the parts of you that no one else saw, the doubts you carried in silence, the pain from your past, the fears you rarely gave voice to. You shared not just your laughter, but your tears. You let them see the wounds you hid from the world, believing they would hold your heart gently, that they would stand guard over your brokenness. But they didn't. They didn't protect your vulnerability. They exploited it. They saw your trust as leverage. Your honesty became ammunition. The very things you shared with trembling hands, things that took you years to even say out loud, were twisted, mocked, or used against you the moment it suited them. They smiled when you cried. They minimized your pain. They whispered your secrets to others, or worse, threw them back in your face during moments of anger or power play. And each time they did, a little piece of you died inside. Do you remember how it felt? That sting in your chest when you realized someone you trusted saw your pain not as something to protect, but as something to control. That bitter silence after a fight, when you realized they remembered your triggers just enough to use them like weapons, The confusion that settled in your spirit as you tried to make sense of why someone who claimed to love you would be so quick to wound you where you were already bleeding. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't even asking for constant comfort. All you wanted was for your pain to be safe in their presence, for your tears to be met with understanding instead of strategy. But they had no intention of holding your heart. They only wanted to hold power over it. And now? Now they are surrounded by people who smile with their mouths, but not with their hearts. People who nod and play along, but who don't truly see them. They walk through crowds and still feel alone. They try to open up, but no one listens the way you did. They try to vent, but nobody holds their silence the way you did. They attempt to trust, but what they find are empty connections built on convenience and ego, not love and empathy. They've entered a world where appearances matter more than substance, where everyone is pretending and no one is loyal. The games they once played on your heart are now being played on theirs, and unlike you, they don't know how to survive it. They don't know how to rebuild when the people around them start turning cold. They don't know how to carry their wounds alone, because they never had to. But this time, no one is coming to rescue them. No one is going to see through their fake smile and ask, "Are you really okay?" No one is going to sit beside them in their silence and offer presence without conditions, because people like you are rare, and they threw it away. They thought you were too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But now, they are lost among people who feel nothing deeply, who give nothing freely, and who take everything with entitlement. They thought they were smart to use your pain against you, but they didn't realize they were building a prison around themselves, brick by brick, with the very stones they once hurled at your heart. Karma has no need to shout. Sometimes it simply mirrors our cruelty by giving us exactly what we gave to others. Emptiness where comfort once lived, silence where empathy once spoke, and a crowd full of faces that will never understand them the way you did. They used your vulnerability as a tool. Now they will search endlessly for someone who listens, cares, and protects. But all they will find are people who only pretend to. They laughed at your pain. Now their joy will be short-lived and hollow. There are few wounds deeper than realizing your suffering became someone else's entertainment. You didn't just endure the pain, you endured the mockery that came with it. When you were struggling, when your world was falling apart, when you were doing everything in your power just to hold yourself together, they weren't concerned. They were amused. Instead of offering support, they offered sarcasm. Instead of empathy, they chose judgment. They found humor in your hurt, satisfaction in your silence, and pleasure in the fact that you were down while they felt up. They didn't just fail you, they mocked your misery. It may not have been loud or obvious. They may not have stood on a stage and pointed fingers, but the little comments they made behind your back, the way they twisted your truth into a joke, the way they imitated your vulnerability as if it were something laughable, all of it cut deeper than any overt attack. Because they knew you were fragile in that moment. They saw it, and instead of covering your pain, they exposed it. Instead of helping you rise, they pushed you further down. And perhaps the most painful part, you still tried to see the good in them. You still gave them the benefit of the doubt. You tried to believe that their laughter was harmless, that their words weren't meant to hurt. But over time you realized it wasn't accidental, it was intentional. They knew exactly what they were doing. They enjoyed the upper hand. Your struggle made them feel superior, and every time you trusted them again, they laughed a little louder. It takes a cruel heart to smile at someone else's downfall. It takes a cold soul to be entertained by another's breaking point. And while you were busy trying to survive, they were creating a narrative where you were the punchline. But the truth about joy that is built on someone else's pain is this: it never lasts. It may look like they're winning, It may look like they're thriving, but joy that is birthed from cruelty carries a curse. It is shallow, short-lived, and destined to collapse. And now, that collapse has begun. They have tried to chase the same high, the same twisted satisfaction they once got from your pain, but it no longer works. Life has changed. Their laughter echoes in empty rooms. The same people who used to join in their mockery are slowly pulling away. Their jokes fall flat. Their confidence feels forced. Their joy, if you can even call it that, has turned hollow, because deep down they know there is a difference between being happy and being entertained by someone else's suffering. Life has a way of flipping the script. The same things they mocked you for, they are now facing those very battles. The very pain they once laughed at is now staring them in the face. And what's worse, no one is laughing with them anymore. Where once they found amusement, they now find isolation. Where once they found an audience, they now find silence. Because the world always catches up to cruelty. It just takes time. And you? The one who was laughed at, belittled, and dismissed? You're rising now, not with vengeance, but with quiet strength. You're no longer defined by the hurt they caused. In fact, their laughter no longer holds power over you, because now their joy has no meaning, and yours is just beginning. Their laughter once echoed through your brokenness, but now it echoes in their emptiness. They thought you'd never rise again. Now your growth will haunt their memories. They watched you fall and assumed you were finished. In their eyes, your pain was permanent. Your silence was surrender. They mistook the stillness in your spirit as proof that you'd given up, that life had finally broken you beyond repair. They saw you in your lowest moments, when you were uncertain, insecure, and quietly crumbling under the weight of everything you carried, and they convinced themselves you wouldn't come back from it. To them, you were done, defeated, forgotten. They didn't realize that some storms don't destroy you, they prepare you. They mistook your rebuilding season for a burial. They thought the silence meant you had nothing left to say, when in reality, you were just done explaining yourself to people who delighted in misunderstanding you. What they couldn't comprehend is that healing doesn't always look like progress to the outside world. Sometimes healing means isolation. Sometimes it means stepping back, going quiet, and being invisible for a while. Not because you've disappeared, but because you've gone within to rebuild. You see, your rise wasn't loud. It didn't come with grand announcements or attention-seeking noise. It came in the moments they weren't watching. It came in your private victories, the days you chose peace over panic, forgiveness over fury, and progress over perfection. You rose when you refused to give in to bitterness. You rose every time you chose to believe in yourself again, even after they gave you every reason not to. And now, slowly but surely, the evidence of your growth is becoming impossible to ignore. They see it in your strength, how you speak without hesitation, how your presence no longer pleads for validation. They see it in your eyes, clearer, firmer, no longer searching for the approval they once dangled like bait. They see it in your choices, the people you no longer chase, the places you no longer shrink in, the boundaries you now defend without apology. Your transformation is not just visible, it's radiant. It speaks for itself in every room you enter, in every situation you once would have tolerated, but now walk away from with peace. And here's where the shift begins to burn them, because they thought they left you behind. They thought they broke you so deeply that you would never be whole again. But now, they're forced to witness the very thing they said you'd never become. Your rise is no longer theoretical. It's real. It's happening in front of their eyes. And every step you take forward reminds them of the role they played in trying to hold you back. It's a peculiar kind of torment to watch someone you once underestimated surpass every limitation you tried to place on them. To realize that the person you thought would always be beneath you is now standing in a place you can't reach. That's the power of divine justice. It doesn't just restore the broken, it elevates them in ways that confound those who cause the pain. And the most haunting part, you don't even have to say a word, your life is speaking loud enough. Every achievement you earn, every smile you wear, every moment of peace you live in, it all echoes in their memory. It reminds them of how wrong they were, how careless. It forces them to face a version of you they never imagined would exist. A version that doesn't need them, doesn't beg for their approval, and no longer carries the weight of their betrayal. Your growth is not just your healing, it's their reckoning. They thought you'd never rise again. Now every step you take forward becomes a shadow they can't escape. They spread lies in secret. Now the truth will expose them publicly. There is a kind of betrayal that doesn't pierce the body but shatters the spirit. It's when someone you once trusted begins to reshape your identity behind closed doors. Not by confronting you, not by speaking to you directly, but by planting seeds of doubt in the minds of others. They didn't need weapons to harm you. They used words. Quietly, subtly, and consistently, they began a campaign to distort how others saw you, how your story was told, how your character was interpreted. And the most vicious part? They did it with a smile. To your face, they acted neutral, perhaps even kind. But behind your back, they were architects of rumors, authors of twisted narratives that painted you in shades of shame. They took pieces of your truth, distorted them with their own insecurities, and built entire stories that were easier for others to believe. Not because you were guilty, but because lies often wear the mask of credibility when told by someone close. They whispered in rooms you weren't allowed to enter. They offered their version of events before you ever had a chance to explain. And the people who once respected you, trusted you, and stood by you began to shift. They didn't look at you the same. They pulled back, hesitated, chose distance. You didn't even understand what had changed at first. All you knew was that suddenly everything felt colder, more distant, like you were walking through a fog of quiet suspicion you couldn't explain. That's the cruelty of lies told in secret. They don't just ruin reputations, they isolate souls. And what made it worse was how calculated it all felt. They knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't just venting or expressing concern. They were manipulating perception. They were building a case against you, without evidence, without balance, without mercy. And yet, in public, they kept up the performance. The handshakes, the casual greetings, the false concern. It was all theater. Because in their heart, they believed they were winning, that they had silenced you, that they had stolen your credibility forever. But truth has a strange way of surviving. It doesn't always speak first, but it always speaks last. And when it does not whisper, it roars. They thought no one would ever find out. They were convinced their version of the story would last forever. But life has its own rhythm. The same people they manipulated are beginning to ask questions. The cracks in their story are starting to show. Inconsistencies, contradictions, small revelations. One by one, the lies are unraveling, and as they do, the spotlight begins to shift. Suddenly, eyes that once judged you are now watching them. Ears that once listened to their gossip are hearing new versions of the story, versions that sound a lot more like the truth. You didn't have to seek revenge. You didn't have to defend yourself in every room you weren't in. All you did was hold your peace, protect your spirit, and trust that time would reveal what your voice was never allowed to say. And now it's happening. Their lies are becoming burdens they can no longer carry. Their reputation, the one they used to destroy yours, is now being questioned, piece by piece. People are starting to realize that someone who speaks about others so easily is often hiding their own flaws, that someone who works so hard to tear another person down is usually trying to distract from their own brokenness. And the more the truth comes to light, the more their own image begins to crumble. It's one thing to be gossiped about, it's another to watch your name be dragged through the mud by someone who once called you family, friend, or partner. But the moment when the truth begins to rise, when the lies lose their grip, is a kind of justice that no amount of anger can achieve. This isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. It's about finally being seen for who you truly are, not through the lens of someone else's bitterness, but through the clarity of truth. And the same crowd that once turned away from you, many will return. Not all with apologies, but with silence and respect. Because they'll see now what they should have seen then. Your character was never the problem. Their lies were. Let the truth rise. Let it speak for you. Because those who twisted your story are now watching their own stories unravel. And this time, everyone is paying attention. They left you when you needed them most. Now they'll be abandoned in their own time of crisis. There are moments in life when all the noise fades away, and the only thing that remains is your need for someone to simply stay, not to fix everything, not to have all the answers, but to just be there, present, real, and unwavering. And in those moments you looked for them, the ones who promised they'd never leave, the ones who swore they were different. You believed their words because their closeness felt safe. You believed in their loyalty because your love for them was sincere. You trusted them because you had shown up for them time and time again, even when it cost you. But when your world collapsed, they vanished. When the darkness surrounded you, they closed their eyes. When you were gasping for support, for understanding, for someone to stand beside you, they backed away, silently, coldly, as if your pain was an inconvenience, as if your vulnerability was a burden, as if everything you had shared meant nothing. They didn't say goodbye, they didn't explain, they just disappeared. And what hurt them most wasn't the silence, it was the knowing. Knowing they could have stayed but chose not to. Knowing they saw you struggling and instead of offering a hand, they turned their back. You needed them in a way that was raw and unfiltered. You weren't asking for grand gestures or heroic efforts, just presence, just reassurance, just the kind of simple human loyalty that says, even now, I'm here. But they weren't, and the silence that followed their absence became louder than any argument could have ever been. It echoed through your soul, not just as a reminder of their betrayal, but as evidence of how easy it was for them to walk away. And now? Now life has taken its course. Seasons have shifted, time has moved on, and just as it happened with you, their day has come. A day when they too find themselves at a breaking point. A day when their carefully curated life begins to fall apart. When their masks no longer fit, their charm no longer works, and the weight of everything they ignored comes crashing down on them. And in that moment, they reach out. They search for hands to hold, for voices to reassure, for shoulders to lean on. But the room is empty. Not because the world is cruel, not because no one cares, but because that is how karma works. It mirrors our actions when we least expect it. The same way they walked away from your darkness, others now walk away from theirs. The same apathy they gave you is now returned to them. They know what it feels like now to beg for someone to stay and receive silence in return. They know the ache of watching people disappear when all you want is to feel seen. They know the agony of being surrounded by people, yet feeling completely alone. They left you in the cold. Now they feel that same coldness settle into their own lives. The same way they abandoned you during your storm, life is now teaching them what abandonment tastes like when the skies turn grey. They are being taught not by you, but by the very universe they thought they could outsmart. This isn't revenge. This isn't you wishing them harm. This is balance. This is divine justice unfolding, not with rage, but with precision. And here's the most profound truth. Your pain birthed strength. Their betrayal awakened your resilience. You learned how to stand alone. But they never learned how to be alone because they never had to. They were always the ones leaning on others, always the ones receiving grace without giving it back. Now, in their hour of need, they are learning what you already survived. They are realizing the true cost of walking away from someone who loved them through their lowest. They are realizing that loyalty isn't something you can withdraw and expect to collect again later. That presence isn't something you can withhold without consequence. They left you when you needed them most. Now, in their moment of emptiness, they will remember the one person who never would have left them, and how they made the choice to leave first. Let them sit in the silence they once gave you. Let them taste the abandonment they once justified. Because what they're experiencing now is not punishment, it's the lesson they earned. They felt no guilt. Now they'll be burdened by a guilt no one can erase. In the aftermath of what they did to you, what cut the deepest wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was how easily they moved on. How effortlessly they carried on with their lives as if nothing ever happened. You were the one left holding the broken pieces, trying to make sense of what went wrong. You played back every word, every moment, every memory, trying to see if you missed a sign, trying to understand how someone could look you in the eyes, hurt you so deeply, and then walk away without flinching. There were no apologies, no tears, no late-night texts filled with regret, just silence. And worse, indifference. They didn't just leave you broken, they left you feeling like your pain didn't matter at all. They laughed, they celebrated, they lived, while you wept, doubted, and tried to survive. You waited, not for them to suffer, but for them to at least feel something, anything. Even a flicker of remorse would have made the pain a little more bearable, but they didn't feel it, not then. They told themselves you were overreacting, that you were too sensitive, that what they did wasn't that bad. They buried the truth so deep within themselves, it was as if your suffering was just a story they deleted from their memory. They painted themselves as the victim, rewrote the narrative, and every time someone asked about you, they gave the version that made them look innocent, blameless, justified. But guilt has a long memory, and time has a cruel way of peeling back the illusions we use to protect ourselves from truth. For a while they succeeded. They distracted themselves, stayed busy, surrounded themselves with people who echoed their lies. They drowned out the voice of conscience with noise, parties, relationships, shallow conversations. But guilt is not so easily silenced. It waits, quietly, patiently, until the distractions wear thin and the silence starts to stretch. That's when the memories return. At first, just flashes, a word you once said, a place you once went, a photo they forgot to delete. And then, slowly, it becomes heavier, more persistent. They remember the tears they ignored, the phone calls they left unanswered, the pain in your voice that they pretended not to hear. They remember the exact moment they turned away, and the sickening awareness that you would have never done that to them. It haunts them not just in moments of silence, but in the most unexpected places. In songs that once reminded them of good times with you, in conversations where your name comes up and they can't explain the bitterness in their throat. In moments when they need someone and realize the only person who truly cared is the one they pushed away. They try to tell themselves they did the right thing. They repeat the same excuses, but something inside has shifted. The truth is louder now. They are no longer able to hide from it. They feel it when they close their eyes. They feel it when they're alone in their car, thinking too long. They feel it when they see someone else treated the way you once treated them, with purity, loyalty, and depth, and reminds them of what they lost, and the guilt begins to gnaw away at the edges of their peace. They smile less. They doubt themselves more. They replay old memories with new understanding, now realizing how wrong they were, how cruel they had been, how precious your presence truly was. And this kind of guilt isn't temporary. It isn't fixed by a simple apology or a moment of clarity. It stays. It lingers. Because deep down they know there is no going back. They know they can't undo what was done. They can't unbreak the trust. They can't erase the betrayal. The same heart that once felt nothing now feels everything, and it's too late. This is the burden they carry now. Not just the loss of you, but the realization that they were the reason for it, that their coldness destroyed something rare, that their indifference cost them something irreplaceable. They walk around smiling in public, but the guilt follows them like a shadow, a weight that no one else sees, but one that they can never put down, because they felt no guilt then, and now it's the only thing they feel. Let karma finish the work you never could. You gave everything you had to people who didn't deserve even half of it. You stayed loyal to those who were quietly planning your downfall. You loved with depth, trusted with sincerity, and forgave more than they'll ever understand. And what did they give you in return? Lies, silence, abandonment, betrayal without apology, cruelty without remorse. But you are still standing. You survived the storm they left you in. You rose from the wreckage they created. And now the same people who once watched you fall are watching something far more powerful. Your rise, your growth, your peace, the restoration of your soul. Karma is not a myth. It is not a fantasy whispered to comfort the broken. It is real, and its work is precise. You didn't have to fight back. You didn't have to prove yourself. You didn't need to chase justice, because life in its divine wisdom always brings back what was sent out. Their laughter has turned into silence. Their ease has turned into unrest. Their lies have unraveled. Their circle has shrunk. And slowly they are learning what you already had to learn, the hard way. You are no longer defined by the pain they caused you. You are not the broken person they left behind. You are the proof that healing is possible, that truth always rises, and that divine justice never sleeps. Let this be your peace. You don't need revenge. You don't need their regret. You don't even need their apology, because they will remember you, not in joy, but in guilt, not in comfort, but in consequence. And you'll keep rising, unbothered, unapologetic, fully aware that karma has already taken the seat you once fought to fill. Let them carry the weight of what they did, and you carry the freedom of what you survived. Because in the end, the people who betrayed you without guilt will lose everything they once held dear, not by your hands, but by the very balance of life they never believed in. That is justice, that is karma, and that is your closure.